So first of all, very good evening to all of you. And I don't know who are the other times, or good afternoon to all of you. And I would like to thank CDPP, the Center for Developing Policy and Perspective, for organizing this discussion and for editing this wonderful volume. And I'm really delighted to be here, and I would like to now present. So I will be presenting doing my presentation here, and I'll read my paper. So the title is the Citizenship Regimes and Contested Notions of Homeland, Understanding the Paradox and Politics. The Citizenship Amendment Acts, including my slide is not moving. I don't know why. Okay, now it is. The Citizenship Amendment Acts, including the recent 2019 known as Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizenship, have explicitly and implicitly evoked religion as a dominant marker of identity and territory. The CANRC is justified on two grounds. Referring to the Nehru-Liaquat Agreement of 1950 as a symbol of betrayal against Hindu minorities in Pakistan, it is claimed that the CA was brought by the current government to correct historical injustice done to people who fled their home countries to India to escape religious persecution and to fulfill promises made to the minorities in neighboring nations. It is claimed that Pakistan and later Bangladesh do not protect Hindu minorities living in their territories. Thus, the CA in 2019 is drafted to offer fast-track citizenship to 6 specific non-Muslim religious minorities of 3 neighboring Muslim majority states, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Secondly, evoking the partition of 1947, it is emphasized that India should be a natural homeland of Hindus living in South Asian region, and thus Hindu majority India should protect those Hindus who are living in Muslim majority areas. What do we mean by this? So what does it evoke? First of all, these comments or these statements actually refer to partition, the movement of the formation of two nations, and secondly, it also refers to the historical injustice, which by their definition is not adopting decent religion or blood as the criteria of citizenship right. And third important aspect which these statements are evoking is the minorities, the definition of minority, which is purely defined purely in terms of communal minorities. Now, the CNRC debate has evoked the discursive constitution of community-based relation. The constant conjuring of the status of minorities in majority nations, purely in terms of religious identity with reference to historical injustice, exemplifies the discourse of Homeland, a political template that redefined South Asian politics in an unprecedented manner in the 1940s. The objective of this paper The objective of this paper is thus to situate the recent debate on Indian citizenship in the backdrop of historical continuities. It asks the fundamental question: how did the secular and Hindutva notion of nation produce a contested definition of citizenship? Why is the category of religion? Why is the category of religion evoked as a marker of identity and space to talk about citizenship rights? And what kind of homeland is envisaged by the CAA 2019? Now, first of all, so I have just, divided my paper into three, you can say, phases or processes. So the first is the Constituent Assembly debate and citizenship right, which is 1947 to 1955. Second is the post-colonial politics, Hindu homeland and citizenship, between 1950s to 1980s. Religion, citizenship, and minority changing definition of minority, post 1985 developments. And finally, the Homeland Politics in Citizenship or Constituency, the CAA 2019. So this is how I have divided. Now I would like to read out. The colonial politics established religion as a highly contested category. This contestation, in fact, defined the different yet deeply interconnected trajectories of Indian state, post-colonial, post-partition, and post-independence, which emerged out of a long struggle to be independent and united. One of the most important contradictions in the achievement of these two goals and later was the tussle between the acceptance and or rejection of the category of religion as a marker of polity, identity, and space. Thus, the question of citizenship had to be treated carefully in the Constituent Assembly. Now, these are two maps actually I'm showing here. One of the first map is actually the one which was used by Ambedkar in his book Pakistan or the Partition of India. And very interestingly, it shows that how, if partition happens, then what is going to happen, how India, the British India, are going to look like. And the other map is the partition map representing partition India. And these arrow signs actually show the movement of population from these border areas and the conflict emerging out of this kind of partition. The division of South Asian religions line, subsequent migration of communities across borders, and violence provoked many members of the Constituent Assembly of India to consider Hindus and Sikhs living in the region called Pakistan and many other parts of the world as the natural citizen of India. This perspective, largely supported by Hindu nationalists, argued for making provisions to grant unconditional Indian citizenship to Hindus and Sikhs while rejecting every proposal for allowing those returning Muslims who wanted to be recognized as Indians. Now, who were actually the victims of partition? So, first of all, the victims of partition, who were the ones whose citizenship actually became controversial. So, one is the victims of partition violence, which included everyone across religious communities. Second is the Muslims who became Pakistani by default because they were there in that particular region and wanted to be identified as Indian. And the third, people living outside the territories of India and Pakistan, people who have gone to South Africa as indentured laborers and things like that. On the contrary, Nehru's idea. So there was one argument that Hindu and Sikh should be considered as natural citizens of India, while the Nehruvian vision, Nehru's philosophy was different, and he was all inclusive. So on the contrary, Nehru's idea of an inclusive India, the liberal democratic ideological framework that became the dominant ideology of Indian state, tried defining Indian population through secular administrative principles. This is how Nehru had imagined India, a homeland of diverse communities. He proposed for collective claims to the principle of the protection of minority rights. This framework envisaged a process of depoliticization and decommunalization of religious identity as a way to achieve a secular, united, and integrated India. It was to be done by the rejection of the category of religion as a marker of official and political identity of diverse social groups. For this, Nehru and his associates in the Congress introduced more neutral and secular categories to deal with the chaos created by the partition. For instance, terms like refugee, immigrant, displaced, abducted, majority, and minority were introduced as official categories instead of Hindu, Sikh, or Muslim. However, while the terminology was overwhelmingly constitutionalized, it merely reinforced the division between Hindus and Muslims and reestablished cleavages internal to some of these colonial categories and the realities of partition. For instance, term refugee or Sharanarthi was used for the Hindu and Sikh population moved from Pakistan to India, while Muslim returnees, including those who were in the region called Pakistan at the time of partition, but wished to move to the Indian side, were called migrants. Similarly, the term minority and majority was considered to be a more democratic and secular way of recognizing communities in post-colonial, post-partition context. But it merely reinforced the division between Hindu majority and non-Hindu minority, producing a new category of minority citizens. The term was left undefined in the Indian constitution following the democratic principle, but the political class continued referring it in terms of communal associations. These contradictions between the two ideologies on the identity of citizens were very visible in the debates, which led to a change of approach in framing the initially drafted citizenship clause. So these two this statement is from P.S. Deshmukh, a socialist activist and Congress member, who actually persuaded for this kind of citizenship right. And he also argued that we Hindus have no other country to look to for acquiring citizenship right, and therefore we should have the right of citizenship in India, and we should have India as a Hindu homeland, the way Muslims have Pakistan. So this is a table which actually explains the different ideas of India or different or dominant political ideologies that define the nature of a state. Obviously, the secular republic, India became secular republic, but how these two different definitions actually produced religion or religious identity as a contested category that we can see, and eventually the Citizenship Amendment Act actually had to adopt the principle while rejecting the identity of religion. It has to put a permit system to take the Muslim returnees back into India. The proponents of religion-based citizenship argue that the refugees were the nationals of India, and by the mere fact of partition, they have not ceased to be citizens of India if they want to settle permanently in this country. They have every right to citizenship, and any obstacle in their way is justifiable, and wrong. On the other hand, those who desire to become citizens of Pakistan on the 15th of August 1947, or who left their domicile for the same, have forfeited their right to become citizens. Now, so the Constituent Assembly debates reveal a few important points that set the contours of politics in India. First, the representation of Hindus and Hindu ethos of Indian society were posed as something distinct from the secular principle, the Nehruvian framework of democratic politics. In this way, the proponents of Hindu nationalism carved out an imagined Hindu constituency across the territories of South Asia and posed themselves as the sole representative of Hindu interests. Secondly, the category of religion as a consequence of the secular Hindutva binary remained contested in the backdrop of partition. The Indian state adopted secular neutral administrative categories for recognizing communities, even in relation to Pakistan-related developments, but religious identity remained contested in electoral politics. Thirdly, the Muslim-Pakistan connection was constantly evoked by the Hindutva forces to define and push the idea of Hindu homeland. This evocation produced a discursively constituted notion of community-based relation. Now, I would like to talk about the second phase. The Indian citizenship issue remained a provocative one and resurfaced in different phases of Indian politics. The Hindu nationalist organization reinvented the idea of citizenship for political purpose to complete the unfinished project of achieving Hindu homeland, the Hindu idea of India. Although the Hindu Mahasabha, RSS, and BJS did not subscribe to any common collective political program of action, there was an ideological consensus that India is a land of Hindus and it should be established as Hindu homeland. This is an abstract from Savarkar's book Hindutva ke Panch Pran. The BJS reformulated Hindutva ideology and the need for a Hindu homeland as an electoral promise. For instance, it proposed an interesting critique of the secular constitution. The party manifesto of 1951 called upon voters to establish a Dharma Rajya based on rule of law for the revival of Bharatiya culture and revitalization of true Bharatiya nationalism to extend the citizenship right to all Hindus. It actually points out what I'm reading here and how the whole idea of Hindu nationalism or the religion of politics of religion was actually carried on even though it was not constitutionally recognized. Um, for instance, it proposed an interesting critique of secular constitution. The party manifesto of 51 called upon voters to establish a Dharma Rajya based on rule of law for the revival of Bharatiya culture and revitalization of true Bharatiya nationalism to extend the citizenship rights to all Hindus. Similarly, the Bharatiya Jansangh 1957 manifesto demanded that there could be no visa restrictions for the Hindu migrating from Pakistan. It also demanded unconditional Indian citizenship to Hindu Pakistanis. So, here it explains the rhetoric of Hindu brethren. The survival of Hindu homeland discourse had a few serious political implications with regard to citizenship debate in post 1950 period. Now, this is a statement from Golwalkar, who was the chief of RSS, and it was published in 1970. He gave an interview to the press. So RSS used his statement to justify the idea of Hindu homeland, and it was in 1970. So after partition, it says that lakhs of Hindu brethren living in East Pakistan have been facing untold calamities. Crossing the border of Pakistan and coming to the shelter of our government has also become difficult due to insecure conditions. So basically, they argued that it should be the responsibility of the Indian government to protect Hindu minorities. Now it says this politics can be, this Hindu homeland discourse had a few serious political implications with regard to citizenship debate in the 1950s period. First, the Hindutva organizations evolved a Hindu version of secularism. It rejected the Nehru Congress's concept, calling it Chadam Dharmanirpekshta or pseudo secularism, because according to them, it discriminated on the basis of religion in the name of minority rights. Secondly, Hindutva organizations invoke the language of minority majority, which was defined as a neutral category in the constitution, to translate it into purely religious terms: Hindu majority, Muslim minority. These categories were placed in a binary opposition to each other to justify their political imagination and claim over Indian space: Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan. Thirdly, the discourse of good refugee and bad refugee was reformulated by distinguishing between Muslim and non-Muslim migrants. Muslim migrants were called as Pakistani infiltrators, while Hindus and Sikhs were addressed as refugees in order to refuse any possibility of Muslim claim over Indian space. These categories were redrafted to define legalities and illegalities under the wider framework of citizenship laws in the later period. Fourthly, the plight of Hindus in Pakistan was used strategically to target Indian Muslims who were called Pakistani spies or the fifth columnist, associates of Pakistan, enemy Pakistan. Finally, the Hindutva groups continued posing Hindu Pakistanis and Indian Muslims as reminiscents of two nations who, according to them, were on the wrong side of the border. In this schema, the Muslim dominated areas in India were defined as mini Pakistan, situated wrongfully in the larger India or Hindu nation. Despite the proposed cultural homogenization to correct this odd, institutional mechanisms were suggested for the systematic inclusion of the other. The Hindutva under BJP, new version of Bharatiya Jansangh, in the post-1980 period, emerged as a significant political force. The Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi controversy and the successful demolition of the mosque in 1992 established Hindutva ideology as a mobilizing force. It increasingly became compulsory for Hindu nationalists to define the notion of Hindu homeland in a more profound and concrete form. Thus, the Hindu nationalist organizations shifted their stand from appropriating the mainstream political discourse to defining it from the perspective of Hindutva. For this, the notion of Hindu Rashtra had to be redefined with a democratic, inclusive, and accommodative outlook. The Modi government left the bottom-up approach and moved to Hindutva constitutionalism to establish Hindutva as a state ideology without declaring Hinduism as a state religion or changing the constitution through legislative developments. Now here, this debate, the debate on citizenship laws, redefined the question of belonging and rights in different contexts and eventually reduced it to a divisive political narrative. However, it cannot be seen in isolation to the significant changes that took place in Indian politics and in the legal definition of a minority after the 1990s, which signifies a shift from state-centric secularism to a religious identity-based political discourse. The term minority was officially redefined in purely religious terms with two acts: the National Commission for Minorities Act 1992. It declared 5 communities as religious minorities at national level in India: Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Zoroastrians or Parsis, and established a National Commission for Minorities. The Act, in effect, fixed the definition of minority and quite inevitably declared Hindus as the only majority community in India. Later, the National Commission for Minority Educational Institution Act was also passed by the UPA-led Parliament in 2004. It defined minority as a community notified as such by the central government. And for this, the numerical strength of any community was actually established as the criteria to be declared as a minority, religious minority. However, the Act excluded linguistic minorities from the ambit of the law. Later, in 2006, the Ministry of Minority Affairs was carved out of the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. The central government funded such a commission report on Muslim marginalization, inserted the category in the framework of public policy, replacing the category of class. So we see, moreover, in this framework, numerical strength of a religious community was established as a prime indicator to be declared a religious or linguistic community as a minority. This recognition of the category of religion in legal official terms paved the way for a different kind of communal politics that constantly evoked the framework of constitutional rights. Most importantly, it contributed in the formation of Hindu victimhood vis-a-vis Muslim appeasement narrative, reducing the diversity and dynamism of communities and identities to homogeneity thesis. I'd like to just move to this, the third phase, which is the religion, about the religion, citizenship, and minority post 85 development. The multiple amendments in the citizenship law in 1985, 2004, and recently in 2019 exemplifies a slow and gradual shift from a religion-neutral law to a law that implicitly or explicitly identifies, classifies, and differentiates populations on the basis of religious identity. Creation of Bangladesh produced around 10 million refugee population in the region of Assam who migrated from Bangladesh. This development created a crisis situation for indigenous Assam population in terms of the sharing of resources and employment opportunities. It gave rise to Assam movement. Thus, it became important for the Indian state to define its territories by controlling the movement of populations across border for obvious reasons of securing the indigenous Assami interests and for maintaining internal security. Thus, Assam in this end, I think I would just explain this table here, which actually talks about different, the Citizenship Amendment Acts, and we can see that what were the provisions, and what were the meanings of these provisions, and how, in actual sense, they actually the Citizenship Act, the definition of citizenship actually moved from birthright to a descent-based definition or principle of citizenship. So we can see that after 1985 specifically, um, the 1985 Amendment Act introduced descent as a primary criteria because as it is shown here that people who are born in India prior to 87 to either an Indian mother or father were actually eligible for citizenship. And finally, then we see in 2004, it was reduced to the new definition was introduced of illegal migrants, and the minority Hindus with Pakistani citizenship were actually exempted from the definition. Then we see the other, and finally, then 2000, Citizenship Amendment Act 2019. So we can see here in this act that how eventually it is uh, reduced to a descent-based definition in that sense. Now, I'll just leave this section and move to the last section. The CA 2019 Homeland Politics and Citizens or Constituency. The CA 19 finally and quite explicitly established religious identity as a qualifier to obtain Indian citizenship in the subcontinent. The Act provides a fast-track citizenship to 6 undocumented non-Muslim communities or persecuted religious minorities who had migrated from neighboring countries, including Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, who entered India on or before 31st December 2014. The provision of the Act do not look pro-Hindu in the first instance, as it grants citizenship to the migrants belonging to other religious communities too. However, it creates a powerful binary and, most importantly, a discourse of denial. The CA 19, thus, on the one hand, created the legal basis for claiming that 20 million Hindus and communities following ethnic religions who live in Muslim majority countries in South Asia as potential nationals. In this sense, it reinforces the idea of India as a Hindu homeland exclusive to those who are associated with the land and connected with blood. On the other hand, the Act quite categorically excluded Muslims from its purview. In electoral politics, the denial of rights. In electoral politics, the denial of rights works more powerfully than granting privileges. Denial of rights can be interpreted in multiple ways. First, in the current atmosphere of Islamophobia, the denial of rights to Muslims strengthened the Hindutva constituency inside and outside India. Secondly, denial of rights communalizes geographies, both in terms of residential areas to the national territory. The Act has created a triple effect in this sense. By including Afghanistan in the list of countries responsible for the persecution of religious minorities, the Act has expanded the scope of the communalization of religious identity and space. Secondly, with India surrounded by yet another Islamic nation, with the emergence of an Islamic state of Afghanistan under the Taliban rule, has helped Hindutva groups to play out the threat perception and re-establish the need for a Hindu homeland. Thirdly, the non-recognition of Muslim communities from this newly evolved category of persecuted minorities creates a clear dividing line declaring India a democratic state with Hindu ethos, a reiteration of Sarvadharma Sambhav, and religious tolerance. It defines India as space or shelter to those who are persecuted only because of the religion they follow. It helps establishing Hindutva politics assertion that establishes itself in a binary opposition to the nations that claim an Islamist identity as being intolerant and non-democratic. Even though the Act does not claim to take away citizenship rights of any community, it creates the effect that it required for the propagation of the idea of Hindu homeland. In this schema, the religious differences or identities are defined as political ideologies or organizing principles of states' policies, reducing every other linguistic, regional, ethnic assertion for rights and belonging to a singular category of explanation. Fourthly, the identification of minorities purely in terms of their religious association and numerical presence in legal terms establishes these social groups as political communities across the region. Now I'll just conclude. The above discussion reveals a process that produced a discursively constituted notion of citizenship in India. The debates on the citizenship rights, and more specifically on religion as an official marker of identification, classification, and categorization, signifies powerful historical continuities that help understanding the post-colonial, post-partition trajectory of the Indian state and politics. It broadly indicates a contradiction between the organizing principle of a state policy that established an independent democratic republic of India and the nature of politics which constantly challenged this organizing principle from an ethno-nationalist perspective. This contradiction shaped the nature of constitutional debates, politics, and the legal framework of citizenship and rights. Most importantly, it kept the category of religion ever contested and produced a discursive notion of citizenship that constantly redefined the space community relationship in different contexts. Thus, the debate on citizenship turned out to be the most crucial question that demonstrated this paradox as well as the shift it produced after the 1980s from a state driven secular framework to a religious identity based political discourse. The Hindutva ideology or Hindu nationalism has been the deriving force and the biggest beneficiary of this change. The ideology and its proponents have emerged from a fringe to the core as it has now infiltrated into all spaces institutional, territorial, conceptual, and ideological, with secularism and Muslim as its political and cultural binaries. Hindutva has used citizenship regimes to carve out its distinct ideological position to claim an exclusive Hindu political constituency, no matter how imaginary, diverse, complex, or disassociative this constituency is. The Bharatiya Janata Party and RSS has established themselves as its sole representatives in the contemporary politics. This is where I would like to end. Thank you very much.